Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Fans of Motion, the Ultimate Night Ranger podcast. Joining me today, listen, if you've gone to a Night Ranger concert anytime this year and your ears are just getting off by Brad's fucking playing, the guy responsible for that tone is sitting right there with me here. Everyone, welcome Mr. Darren Hurst.
Hey everybody.
Now, Darren, for those that don't know, is the guitar tech for Brad, Jack, and Carrie, and probably does many other things that we will find out. But Darren has a great history. I always enjoy going to the shows, finding you and talking because we always find something new to talk
Talk
about and
about
always learn something new. But we're gonna, and for those that don't know, and we're gonna find out. Darren's from across the pond there. So if you look right there, look at that. I'll put this down here just for you,
HP
buddy.
sauce. There you go.
There you go. But we're going to talk about the
Do you know what the HP stands for?
House of Parliament or something.
Houses of Parliament. Yeah,
All
Houses of
right.
Parliament sauce.
But
And also, there's a little royal emblem. It's by appointment to Her Majesty the Queen. Well, now the King.
uh,
It's the original. You can't eat sausages or eggs without that. It's a crime, punishable by death. I actually have that on the bus. I have two things I put on the Night Ranger bus. I
yeah.
put English mustard and HP sauce.
So I got when I was in Afghanistan, each country did a chow hall, and my
Yeah.
where I stayed was closest to the English, British chow hall. So I would go there and there's a lot of puddings and pie. I don't know what the hell, but it was usually I usually stayed with the fish and chips, and they didn't really have much ketchup there or anything like that. So, but what they had a ton of was this stuff,
You know
and
why they have that, don't you?
because most of their food tastes like roadkill.
Yeah. British food tastes like shit, so you have to put something that tastes good on it.
Well, it only tastes like shit if you cook it right. Um,
I spent a long time. One of the things I would love to do once Night Ranger finishes, I'm going to do a book on British food that
yeah,
doesn't taste like gourmet British food. So you can do bangers and mash, and you can do fish and chips, and you can do pies and puddings, but you can do them in a modern style. Um, all the stuff that I grew up with in Liverpool, you could actually take that. And it's funny because Ed is a gourmet chef.
yeah,
So I'm gonna get together with Ed and do like English food, gourmet style.
that would be interesting. What I'm trying to think what else. Because I was in England a couple times, and I can't really remember anything about the food. What I always liked was the tavern names. It was like the Queen's Arm or
Yeah,
the
Red Lion or the Fox
yeah
and Goose and the Fox and Hounds.
the Quail and the Hound or
Yeah,
whatever. I
Frog, the
love.
frog and Crumpet or you know,
Well,
yeah.
another thing was their draft beer is not carbonated, so it's
Nope.
all hand pumped.
So yeah,
Um,
and it's cold, you know, but it's not like most of like Stella is cold, but
mhm.
then like ales like Guinness, which is room temperature.
Yeah, yeah,
Like to this day, cold Guinness, I can't get my head around that.
really.
It's
Um, the other thing I always tell people is, so I had come back when I was in England, I'd be coming back from missions in Turkey,
right.
not an English speaking country, but there were people there that could speak English. And I just remember being there at a pub in England and asking someone about something, like, hey, where's the nearest taxi place or whatever, something that, right? And he gave me an answer of probably 5 or 6 sentences. I don't think I understood 90% of it. And I'm like, I understood more asking people in Turkey their second language. It was just,
With
such a
some
strong accent. I'm
with
like
some accents,
trying to,
we can get. I can do most of the English accents. Um, my mom talks like this. Like my mom talks really fast. Like if you ask my mom like where she wants to go, she'll tell you like, "Hey, let's go to the pub." Like. My dad was Irish, and my dad talks like this, like, right down his nose. Oh, enough for you. Hey, son, I'm going fish and chips, like. Um, and then there's some regional accents that are just stupid. But I thought this was, we're not here to slam
Hey
English food.
man,
I thought we were going to talk about Night Ranger.
this the fans of motion listeners. I mean, it's it's culture first, then Night Ranger, and we got to touch on the culture part. So since we already are, so Liverpool, was that where you were born? Where were you?
Yeah, I mean, it's my hometown. I mean, Liverpool is like Chicago or Detroit in that it's a bit of a sprawl. So there's the central Liverpool, and then there's the outliers. So I was born in Liverpool. My grandparents, who kind of raised me, were central Liverpool in a little town called Gettico, which is right next to Chilwell, which is kind of where the Beatles all kind of came from. Dingwall, um, the west side of Liverpool, and then half of my family's from the posh side on the other side of the River Mersey in Bebington and Port Sunlight and Birkenhead. And then I grew up about, I don't know, 18 miles outside the city in a suburb called Wigan, and then moved up to a little Victorian seaside town called Southport. And that was kind of where
So,
that's what I consider my home.
so when you're growing up, well, I guess a question I got is, I mean, one of the first bands, at least I remember as a kid and people talking about, and when you start getting into music, is the Beatles, right?
Right.
How different is it? I mean, to me, the Beatles are from England. They're Liverpool. That's thousands of miles away. Is it any different getting, when you're first getting into music and you're learning about the Beatles, that, hey, they're from here, where I'm at?
Right.
Does that,
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's like growing up in LA and finding out that, your favorite band started out just down the street.
yeah.
Uh,
I guess I'm here in Ohio and there
but
ain't nothing from here.
well, the great thing about growing up in Liverpool is when I first started playing, there's lots of music in Liverpool. So when you start gigging, because I started gigging at 15, 16, you've got to be good because everybody else is good. It's a very, it's like Austin or Nashville or, one of those towns where there's a shit ton of music. So unless you can actually do something, you're not going to get a gig. It's not you can't fake it. So
Mhm.
that was great. Although timing wise, I didn't really get into the Beatles until later on. It was other music that kind of, I mean, I started listening to music in like 77, 78. So it was English punk that was like, that's what I want to do. And then only through discovering my instrument and then talking to my dad a little bit, going, oh, the Beatles. Okay. The Beatles are from just down the street. And then you start taking the tour and you realize that actually my grandparents literally lived 5 streets over from Penny Lane. Um, and then you go, well, was that a coincidence? I don't know, because just I was around it and
Mhm.
exposed to it. But it wasn't until in my 20s where I just realized that the Beatles were just the start of it all. Beatles and Elvis,
Yeah.
Buddy Holly,
Yep.
But I was always drawn to America, American music and American culture, and I don't know why.
So what was, going back to what you said, get a little bit more into what was the music that was turning your ear? And how old were you around that time? 77, 78, you said?
I was born in '68, so middle school for me, because we have a weird education system, but middle school for me, I was 10, and I heard bands like Stiff Little Fingers, Sham 69, The Stranglers, Sex Pistols, um, just really guitar punk. And it was the first time my ear was like, oh, what's that noise? Oh, that's the electric guitar. So I was about 10.
Were you
And
playing guitar at that time?
no, but I wanted to. There's a guitar riff. It's the opening to Stiff Little Fingers Alternative Ulster. And it came on. We used to have a TV show on Thursday night called Top of the Pops.
Uh-huh.
And Top of the Pops was just, it's where everything happened. I mean, if you did music, if that was it, you had to get on Top of the Pops. And Radio 1, which was the national radio show, the national radio station, it was all the Radio One DJs that hosted the show. Um, and so it was, all the punk bands. And then a couple of years, like 82, it was Duran Duran, Soft Cell, Tears for Fears, Spandau Ballet. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Queen comes on. I mean, Queen had kind of hit in like 75. I think Bohemian Rhapsody had kind of, already come out, and Nine of the Opera was out. But the big turning point for me was Live Aid,
And that would have been
um,
what, 80,
85.
85. So when did, because you're mentioning all this stuff, with the punk rock, and you're talking about like new wave, kind of, whatever, you'd put Duran Duran in, in like 82, 83, and you had what's the new wave of the British
New
metal.
wave British heavy metal,
Yeah.
so like Judas Priest,
Um,
Maiden, and stuff like that. So it was. I've always had this really
mhm.
diverse, what I'm drawn to.
When did So you got all that happening right where you're at, but you said you kind of got engulfed a little bit enamored with American culture. Where did that come in?
I don't know
Or
when
when? When?
same about the same time because
Okay.
we only had three TV channels. So we had BBC One, BBC Two, and then an independent TV because the BBC channels were state run. So there was no commercials on those channels. And then we had ITV, which was an independent commercial channel, and they had commercials, they had adverts. And so that independent TV channel carried extra imported shows. So we started watching things like Streets of San Francisco, Kojak, $6 Million Man, MASH. I mean, that was a little bit later, but I'm trying to think what I would watch
Hmm.
when I was like 10 or 11. And so I would look at, American street signs, American cars, American diners, and just be like, it was so different from what I would look out the window and see. And I was just drawn to it. It was
Was it
always
weird? Was it what on them shows and seeing them drive on the right side of the roads?
a little bit.
Because you guys are on the wrong side. So
No, we're on the left side, we're on the correct side.
no,
It took me a minute. Do you know why the English drive on the left side of the road?
uh, probably some earl in some county somewhere was intoxicated.
If it goes back to the kings, the knights of the Round Table, and the Romans, and so when the horses and the knights would fight each other, all the soldiers were right-handed, and so if I want to be in a battle with you on a horse and I'm using a sword, you can't fight on the left-hand side. So I want my opponent to come at me on my right hand side. So as I'm trekking down on my horse, if you come at me on my right hand side, we can battle each other. And that's why uh, the Romans put the chariots on the left. And then when they built all the roads in the territories, when they took over England, they built the Roman roads and the chariots were on the left. And then the knights of the round table, they stayed on the left, and it makes sense if I want to fight you because remember English people like to fight.
Yeah, I mean,
English
and
people like to drink and they like to fight.
it and like most things, especially over there, you can trace everything back 1,500 years for whatever the
Trace it back to the Roman, you trace
reason.
it back to the
Uh,
to King Arthur, you trace it back to the Norsemen, or you trace it back to the Romans.
so so when uh did because you said you were gigging by 15. So, talk about was your first instrument guitar?
Mhm. Yeah, it was the only guitar. It was the only instrument I really wanted to play. And it's funny because my ear had already picked up on, like the punk rock stuff, and I knew it was guitar that was the main instrument, but I didn't have access to one. And I was talking to my dad when I was 12, 13, and he said, "Oh, I've got a guitar in the attic." And he goes up and, disappears into the attic and comes out with a bass guitar, which I put in my hands and it just I had no interest in it. Took it to school, tried, they had a music teacher who had zero interest in bass guitar for some reason. And just kind of just left it alone, but it was still in the back of my mind. And then I changed schools at 13 and a half. And every morning, assembly, piano, singing hymns, praise the Lord, thank you very much, God save the Queen. And one morning, the piano was so out of tune, they couldn't do assembly. And there was a teacher, went to his car, got an acoustic guitar, and we sang hymns. And his name was Ian Whitehead, or Mr. Whitehead. And it was just before my 14th birthday. And I know that because I got my first guitar for my 14th birthday. And so I obviously go up to Mr. Whitehead at the end of assembly and go, "Please, please, please, will you teach me how to play?" And I don't know what it was. He just looked at me and he went, "Okay, but you got to take it seriously." And I did. I got a little classical, little nylon strum guitar, which I've still got. It's up there. Um, and he showed me G, C, and D. And that was it. That was all I needed. And then I'm 99.9% self-taught from that point onwards. But
So,
all I needed was just that impetus,
art,
just the spark.
because you said that was 13 and a half, and you said within a year and a half you're
Yeah,
playing, you're
I was able. Yeah, by the
playing
time I
out.
was 15, I had a band. There was four of us. Uh, I mean, we weren't any good, but we were playing churches, we were playing fates, we were playing sports days, we were playing bank openings, we anything we could just kind of get ourselves into. And then by the time I left school at 15, put a year into doing nothing but playing. And then by the time I was 17, when I got my driving license, I was pretty much playing full time.
So was that your aspiration going into adulthood? Was
Oh yeah, I absolutely wanted to be a guitar player. That was it. I wanted to be around guitars. I wanted to be a guitar player. In the north of England, where I'm from, it doesn't happen so much in the south, but in the north of England, it's very industrial. So you've got a lot of factories, or you did have. So you've got Ford, and you've got these big power plants, and you've got um, factories that employ hundreds and thousands of workers. And so they would be local communities, and these factories would have social clubs. And the social clubs is where the workers would go and drink every night after work. These guys would go Monday down the mines and then go to the bar and drink all night, and they would get subsidized beer and subsidized entertainment. And there is literally a network of hundreds of these clubs, the working men's clubs in the north of England, and you can literally just do nothing but play those clubs. And there's agents that book bands for those. It's all cover band stuff.
Mhm.
Uh, but you can literally be like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, play 5 nights. And you can do that every single week. And I did that for, gosh, probably 7 or 8 years.
Where did you, after that, you know, the 7, 8 years, where did you, because now you're, deep into your 20s, or at least your mid 20s, and you
Teaching,
said,
I started teaching because um, I wanted the reason to stay home and play guitar. After a while, like anything, you get burnt out on carrying because as a band, you're carrying your own PA, you're carrying your own lights, and a lot of these conservative clubs are at the third floor of a factory with a fire escape, and it's November in England in Scarborough. It can get pretty tiring after a while. It's a great training ground for being a roadie. It's funny looking back, like every single thing that happens to me as a professional touring guitar tech happened to me when I was 17 touring the UK in a cover band. It's just,
Mhm.
same shit, different day. Um, but it teaches you how to solve problems. And then, so I started teaching because I felt like my fingers were starting to get a little bit more proficient. Um, in my early 20s, I made the decision that I wanted to go to GIT in Los Angeles. There's a guitar school there. You know, again, same thing, that American culture thing. We would buy in the American guitar magazines, Guitar Player, Guitar World, Guitar for the Practicing Musician, and they would be on the um, newsagent stands. We would pore over the articles. And it's funny because I've still got the one. I remember reading about Brad Gillis and seeing Brad's red Strat, and I've still got the copy of the magazine. And in fact, I had it on my wall. Um, and always at the back of the magazine was an advert for GIT, and people would talk about it. And a lot of my favorite players would reference that school, and that was my dream. I wanted to go to America, and I wanted to go to GIT. But at the time, it was like $20,000, and you couldn't get a work visa, so you had to have enough money to live and work for the year program. So I think you had to prove that you had $50,000 in the bank before you could even apply to the school. And that was way beyond anything I could accomplish growing up in England. And so I started teaching with the idea of trying to save some money and just anything I could do to play guitar. Um, and that's when I started to kind of just make a little bit of progress. And that led to working as a product demonstrator for Celestion, who make guitar speakers. Um, there's an interesting full circle moment on that one. But I started doing the trade show circuit as a professional guitar player, and my hope and my dream was that was going to lead to finding a gig. Um, and That was really interesting because you just stand there on your own with a guitar on and you play it. There's no band, it's just backing tracks. And you've got to kind of play this like virtuoso role. But I was listening to, by that time, I'd discovered people like Steve Vai, Joe Satriani, Paul Gilbert, really great Yngwie Malmsteen and these great technical players. And I was still young enough to kind of want to pursue that level of guitar playing. Now I listen to a whole different level of,
Mm.
you know.
So with I mean that's I mean got to
But
be
I wanted to do the Satriani thing. I mean, I did a solo record 25 years ago. There was an instrumental record. Um, and that came out in like 98, I think I did it. It's funny because you can buy it on eBay for like $70, and I don't own it. It's not mine. I don't see a penny from it. But some guy helped me make it, and I think he's got like a box of 10,000, and he just keeps selling them on eBay.
so with that with what is it Celestion?
Celestion make guitar
Celestion.
speakers, and so the Celestion Vintage 30 was was always my favorite guitar speaker, and so they were advertising for a demonstrator to play the London Music Show, and this was probably '94. Um, and I met one of my best friends. His name's Duncan Boniface, and he was uh, he was the lead speaker designer. And so Marshall amps, Laney amps, all these different amp manufacturers, they don't you typically make their own guitar speaker. They make the box, but you can load it with different things. And so I started to learn about guitar speakers and impedance and how things affect the guitar tone. In fact, the way the Celestion demo was, it was same guitar player, same guitar, same strings, same pickup, same cable, same amp. The only thing that changes is we had three different guitar speakers all loaded with different Celestion speakers. And while I was playing, we would switch between them so people could hear the tonal differences in the speaker. And that was the only variable that changed because there's a huge difference. And most people never get to hear it because if you suddenly decide to grab your guitar amp, play for a little bit, and then change the speakers, it takes you 3 hours to do that. And so your brain can't remember what you had and what you end up with. And so it's a really weird upgrade for people to kind of mentally make. You can change pickups quick, you can change guitars, and you know guitar sounds change. But speakers are not something that people really thought about. And so we came up with this really interesting demonstration. Um, and it was a way for me to kind of, you know, play guitar, play solo guitar. And I ended up getting the full-time gig with those guys. And I worked for them for 3 years, and we would do trade shows all over the place. Um, and that was fantastic.
Well, that's
That
got to
was
be, and that's got to be a big deal too, because they're putting their trust into you
yeah,
to sell their product.
right.
Um,
And so that was where I started to figure out that maybe I had a little bit of a voice on the instrument, that was kind of like, you know, my way of playing. Um,
where did that lead you to?
Led me to America.
So with that company?
Yeah, indirectly, it I ended up working for another company that used Celestion, my friend Mark Goday at Ashdown Amps. And Ashdown sent me to um, a trade show in Sicily. And I did that trade show for 3 years on the run. Uh, Happened to meet an American girl on the beach in Sicily. And that led me to coming to America.
There's always
So
a woman
indirectly, you
involved.
know, how that goes. Um,
So,
and so that was 2000, 2001.
so 2001, is that when you first set boots in the
I'd been
US?
here, I'd been here in 94, 93, 88, 90 was my first time in the US. Myself and a girlfriend at the time, we wanted to see Kiss. And so we came to Seattle to watch Kiss, Winger, and Slaughter at the Key Center in Seattle. And we were only here for like 4 days.
Mm,
So we did the flight to Chicago and then Chicago to Seattle, stayed downtown, watched the show, and then went all the way home. But it was my first time seeing a downtown, and I
yeah.
remember, you know, flying into Chicago and being like, "Wow, this is crazy." And then it came 94. Uh, I was doing a show in my band I was in. We were in a battle of the bands, and we were like a glam rock, like a Poison-esque not a cover band, but we had our own tunes and stuff. And I couldn't find any clothes, so I jokingly said to my girlfriend at the time, I want to go to LA and buy some pants." And she looked at me and she went, "Okay." So same thing. Got on a plane, came to LA, Sunset Strip, 3 days at the Saharan Motel on Sunset Boulevard. Bought some clothes from Melrose. Went home, um, played the show. Didn't win, but that was my second time in the U.S.
So Seattle's definitely different than LA, and especially the bands that you were listening to, mostly probably LA bands. Was what was that like being there for the first time?
Well, you know, because the Seattle thing hadn't happened yet.
Mm,
So the Seattle for me is we didn't go out, we didn't go to a club, we didn't go watch any local bands. I just went to watch Kiss, and it was still hair rock. In the UK, we were listening to, you know, Warrant, we were listening to Firehouse, Guns N' Roses. I mean, we were listening to the hair bands, and so grunge hadn't happened yet.
mm,
That wasn't it hadn't killed music yet
yeah.
or revolutionized music, depending on how you see it. Um, but it was enough to give me my you know my second taste of America, and we went to the Rainbow and the Whiskey, and I actually got to go to GIT and take the tour, and realized that I didn't want to go there at all. Um, and that was cool because it kind of opened my eyes to like, oh, maybe there's a maybe there's a different path in music.
Yeah.
Um,
Before we hit 2001 and you coming to the States, you said something about a solo record in maybe the late 90s?
yeah, I decided through doing the demonstration thing, I had to come up with pieces of music that were interesting enough to stop people in their tracks. Because you know what it's like at a trade show, especially a music trade show. There's all these different guitar manufacturers and string manufacturers and amp manufacturers, and everyone's vowing for for your 5 minutes of attention. And so my job was to stand up and just play guitar. And so I wanted to play things that were interesting enough that people would stop and listen for 5 minutes so that we could do the demonstration. And I started playing little bits of Joe Satriani things and Steve Vai things and Steve Morse things and things that I thought were interesting, Vinnie Moore and my favorite guitar players. And then I thought, well, this is stupid. I've got this platform. Um, why don't I just see if I can write a few little pieces? And so I did. I started writing little demo pieces, and that eventually led to writing more sophisticated pieces of music. And I was listening to a lot of Joe Satriani at that time, and I thought, well, if he can put a solo record out, then so can I. And I just grabbed a few little bits of shitty little stuff in my bedroom, and I made this little solo record. It's called Free Spirit. Um, and yeah, you can still buy it. I don't own it. What? Get out of there. There it
I
is.
I looked it up on the eBay. You can get it. It's on there. Um,
Um, and so it's funny because, and this is a Brad thing. Brad's really inspired me to kind of, and so I'm going to redo it. It's 25 years old. I'm actually going to redo it from the ground up. And if you look around me, in my house, I'm just literally putting my studio together. If you look, if you can see what's over to my right, it's just cables everywhere, cables everywhere. Um, so I'm just putting my studio back together. But the next 4 or 5 months, I'm actually going to redo that little album from the ground up, the way that I hear it, and the way because I have no gear. And the tunes are the songs are good. The production's terrible. Um, and 25 years later, it just doesn't stand up at all. But I have the skill now and a pretty decent studio, and I have the skill set to make it. I've done a couple of them, and I'm really proud and happy of them. And I'd like to leave. I'd like to leave it to my daughter because she's not.
mhm.
I wanted to see her dad play.
Yeah,
Uh,
definitely, definitely. And when you do put that together, give us another excuse to have you on the podcast and talk about the records. So,
talk about the record.
yes.
Um, yeah, Eric's going to play on it. Um, I'm hoping our drum tech Brandon's going to play on it. Keep it in the family, you know, surrounded by some really good talent. So,
Well, if you need a knuckle cracker.
hey, get him moving.
Um,
Uh, but yeah, that was my aspiration. I wanted to play.
yeah.
If you'd have told me I was going to be a guitar tech, I would have told you you were crazy. But um,
So 2001, you is that when you kind of come to the States permanently?
no. So go to Sicily, meet this redhead, and we connect on a a visceral level. I go home and I have a stroke, and just everything stops. Everything stops. Um, and it took a long time to recover from that. Thankfully, um, I made a 98% recovery, but it took a while. It took me a year to get over that. And it was that that gave me the impetus to go, okay, life's fragile. I'm not messing around with this. Um, I want to get out of the UK. It's a depressing place. I don't see a future here. I still believe in the American dream. And so I started the process to come here legally. And that took a while. Um, and that's that was that event was the impetus to do that.
Yeah. Um,
Consequently, the downside is I lost uh, quite a bit of my playing ability. I could still play a guitar, but I didn't have the fluidity that I had when I was doing the Celestian gig.
Hmm. Did
And
any
so
of that did that come back?
yeah, yeah. I mean, no, you get older. I mean, my
Yeah.
6-year-old hands can't do what my 23-year-old hands could do.
Hmm.
Um, but you know, strangely enough, I actually prefer my playing now because you can hear some maturity in it. And all my favorite guitar players that I get to talk to as a tech will tell you the same thing. You know, it's kind of you kind of grow into it. Um, I play my songs differently. I mean, I still play them the same, but I phrase them differently. Uh, Same thing. The guys that I've worked for, you hear them kind of mature.
Hmm.
Listening to Frampton play "Something's Happening" when he was 23, and listening to him play it when he was 70, it's a different thing. Hearing Joe Perry play "Walk This Way" when he was in his early 30s, and then hearing him play it at 73 or whatever he is, it's a different thing. Um, and there's a cool factor to that. So I actually
Yeah.
prefer my playing, even though I don't get to do it very often. I don't have a gig. I don't play in a band. I
Hmm.
get to play. I'm a day ranger. I'm the
Um,
guitar player for Day Ranger.
so when you got, when you finally got here to the States, did you get a job in music? Was it something else
Yeah, I
than
mean,
music?
again, I was teaching, um, but I was living in Las Vegas, and Las Vegas has got a lot of the rental shops, and so I was repairing stuff. I was loading speakers into boxes. I was changing strings, and that kind of led to me making connections as a tech, and just right down at the bottom, just doing backline or local load-ins and stuff like that. Um, because you've got to pay the bills, and
Mhm.
that was a way to stay around music. Um, because I never wanted to get away from it.
Yeah.
Mm.
Was Frampton your first big break in that tech?
No, I mean, I lived, worked, and played in Vegas, and I kind of got back to playing again. The same thing. Vegas is great because there's a big cover band, casino band thing, and so I used the casino band to rebuild my playing. So I worked all day in the rental houses, and then I played 6 nights a week in the casinos till 3 o'clock in the morning. And literally, we would play 4 hours, 4 hours a night. So I got to play 62 songs a night every single night of the week, and I did that because it got my hands back on a guitar. Um, that relationship um, fell away, and I decided to move to Nashville. 2013, I moved to Nashville, just put my stuff in my truck. Didn't know Nashville at all. But at the time, that's kind of where everybody was headed. And I walked into Guitar Center in Nashville, the big Guitar Center in Thompson Lane in Nashville, talked to the guitar department manager. And for some reason, he just looked to me in the eye and he said, I could use a guy like you. Can you start tomorrow? And I started just repairing guitars, repairing pedals, amps, helping people build rigs. And then I started going out with some of the smaller country bands. I worked for a guy called Easton Corbin. Um, I've done, just fill-ins for different techs and different bands. But I was meeting all the touring techs. Um, and then I met my friend Al McManus, who runs a bunch of the cruises, Monsters Rock Cruise, the Ship Rock Cruise, and I started working for him as stage manager or backline tech for the all because all the bands would come onto these ships and it would just be fucking chaos. They're all in different tunings, they're all using different gear, and he wanted someone that could wrangle that whole thing. And so I worked for him for a couple of years.
And you're
Just
working for him because you're working in a shop, so your hands are on all kinds of different equipment. So you kind of are,
But
that.
same thing, kind of that whole cover band thing, carting our PA up the fire escape. So you learn what gear's good, but what's lightweight. or you learn like what you can drop off of a fire escape and still works. And
Mhm.
the reason I met Alan was he came into Guitar Center to buy. This is how stuff works. Came into to Guitar Center to buy a PA system, and he was talking to a young kid that knew nothing about PA. And Alan had money to spend because he was, wanted some gear for a project that he was doing. And I pulled him to one side and said, "Hey, I don't mean to, stomp on this kid, but you don't need this stuff. From what you tell me, this is what I would consider." And he ended up buying a bunch of stuff. And he said, "Well, I'll buy it, but we have a show. My little band has a show tonight. Will you come mix it?" And so I got off work. I met him down at the bar, put all his gear together, mixed the show, and we became friends. And that's how he started using me um, on these cruises and on these gigs. Met this guy called Danny Hill. Danny Hill was doing bands like Adelita's Way, Lifehouse. And so I was going in and doing local tech stuff. Happened to meet the drum tech from Frampton on a cruise, and Peter's tech bailed on him couple of days before a tour was about to start, and I just get this call. Peter Frampton's looking for a tech. Um, are you interested? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Um, and I ended up having that gig for 5 years.
So how the, talk about that day, right? I mean, that's, even though you were, aspiring to be a musician on your own right, uh, I mean, that's Frampton,
Right.
a guitar god. I mean, do you like, all right, who's fucking with me? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Oh, because it came from Al,
yeah.
and so I trusted him. He's like, "Hey, Frampton Camp need," and I've still got the text. He says, "Frampton's camp, in fact, the Frampton Camp needed guitar tech. Any interest?" Question mark. And I just said yes. And I remember because I was sitting outside. Um, it was late February, early March, and it was cold. Was it with with my wife? We were here in Oklahoma, and it was freezing. And I was outside when I got the text message, and I had to take my glove off to reply to it because we were kind of cleaning shit up outside. And literally, I get a text back saying stand by for a call from Peter. And then the phone rings, and it's a FaceTime call. It says FaceTime Peter Frampton. So I answer the call, and I'm like, "Hi, Peter," and he says, "Are you English?" Or, "Hello, are you English?" I'm like, "Yeah." He said, "Okay, can you be in Nashville tomorrow?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Great. I'll text you the address and I'll see you tomorrow." And that was it. So I literally went inside, packed a bag, and drove 10 hours to Nashville. And I met Peter at his studio the next day, and went through his rig, what he needed in a tech. Um, and that was the moment I kind of turned full-time professional guitar tech. And it's only 10 years ago, you
Yeah.
know.
Well, I remember talking to you wherever, I don't remember where at, but we were talking and you threw out a date and I was like, well, that wasn't, you know what I mean? Like,
No,
just to have all these stories in such a short amount of time, I mean, it obviously speaks of your talent and your work. So, what's it like just, your first show with Frampton? You know,
oh, I remember it absolutely. It was in Evansville. It because Peter's got ridiculous guitar collection, and he likes to use different guitars for different songs. But he's also got Phoenix. He's got that Les Paul. That that's the Les Paul that was missing for 30 years.
mhm.
Um, and you know, he in rehearsals, he just gives. I go to his apartment, and he hands me this guitar case, and I put it in my truck, and I get to the rehearsal room, and I open it up, and there's fucking Phoenix. It's $1 million guitar. Um, and you're handing this to Peter Frampton, and then he gives you, yeah, that's it. There it is.
There it
There's
is.
the guitar. If you open that up, it's that guitar. Um, that's it's one of the most amazing guitars as well. It's a really interesting guitar. Um, but I ended up being Peter's tech for 5 years,
Uh,
almost 6 years. And then, once you hit that, a bunch of doors open. People start calling you for other things, and Al call me for other things. And then once you've got that on your resume, um,
but that's what
then
I love about these stories is, the doors open, but what
and it's
got
a
you
blessing, but it's a blessing and a curse because I often wonder, like, would I have carried on playing? Would things have gone another way? But you can't
yeah.
do that
But
because,
it's the hard work. All that work you did before then is what really opens the
and
door.
I think, the other thing as well is, and this is probably why I've worked for the guys that I have worked for, is that I'm a fairly decent guitar player. I've got a lot of tech friends that play, but they're not seasoned guitar players. They play well,
Hmm.
but they haven't got 30 years and they don't have a touch. They don't have that ear. They know how to tune things and they know how to change tubes and they know how to bias amps, but they don't necessarily feel the minutia the way that a Peter Frampton or a Joe Perry or a Brad Gillis or you know a Ted Nugent, those guys who've got a unique voice on their instrument have got that for a reason. And I think that one of the reasons why I've been a little bit successful in that area is because I can feel stuff and I can read my guy and I can deep dive into the gear. I'm pretty proficient on a technical level as well as, I know how to feel things. And I think that was it. And that again is like comes full circle, like 30 years of playing. When I made the full-time move to teching, I have that in my tool bag.
Yeah.
Um, that might not be the reason, but
Mhm.
that would be my answer.
Yeah, I mean, not to get too far ahead or anything, but like, I don't know. I just
Well, I
some
also just love it. I love music, and I'm a nerd. I'm a
yeah.
geek. But I also believe in, like Peter would get really into what kind of cable we were using, like what kind of length of the cable that we were using. My argument would always be, it doesn't matter because it's a fucking great song, you know.
Mhm.
And I could give him, uh, he wanted a 26-foot cable, and I would give him a 30-foot cable, and you know what? He would call me out on it. He'd go, "Are you using a longer cable tonight?" And then I would just go, "God, there is stuff, there is mojo in this stuff, And I started to hear it because Peter was the guy that elevated my hearing, because he's an exceptional musician. Um, and so, I could never, you couldn't buy that kind of
Yeah.
education,
I just
So you asked me what was it like being Peter's tech for the first night.
yeah.
So, I remember in rehearsals, because there's different ways to tune a guitar. You can tune it right on the green, and then some people kind of squeeze and it'll go sharp. And I remember in rehearsals, we were doing a couple of songs, and I just felt like it was a little on the sharp side. And we would get to the end of a run through, and I would say to Peter, "Hey, can I try something?" And I would retune the guitar and I would temper it, and I would give it back to him, and he would look at me and go, "What did you do?" And I would just, and I would make little notes of slightly different tunings for different songs. And the first show, that's what I did. And so as we went down the set list, I would just, change a few things. And I remember doing the show, everything kind of went smooth. And he called me on the radio at the end of the show, and he went, "Darren, that is the best I've ever been looked after." And that was it. Next night, I fucked everything up. Absolutely fucked everything up. Because I was like, oh yeah, I got this. But Peter's rig was pretty extensive too, and he was using cables. And at the time, and I didn't know this, he was starting to feel because you know that he announced that he had the medical thing. He had
Mm.
um, but he was starting to feel that, and he was starting to. In fact, he fell over on stage of my third show. Um, so he was using cables, and I had to wrangle the cables. In fact, if you search for anything of Peter Frampton from like 17, 18, 19, you can see me on the floor on my knees behind him, just keeping the cables out of his way. Because after about 7 or 8 shows, he called me to his hotel room and said, "Hey, I want to explain to you why I fell over." And he told me that he was starting to suffer with this muscle wasting disease, and so my role became much more than just being this guitar tech and changing the strings and doing his patch changes. It was really about keeping him keeping the cable away from his feet, keeping him in, just watching him. I became
Mm.
his eyes, his ears. Um, but it was a great education.
Yeah.
I
That,
love.
talking about Peter Frampton, we got a lot of fans who are Kiss fans, and there is a little bit of crossover there. Did you ever work with the late John Reagan?
Did
Uh,
did
tell us a little bit about John.
just only a couple of times. Um, we were on the finale tour, and we were playing Madison Square Garden, and John came back to the band and sat in for a few songs that night at Madison Square Garden, and it was just magic. Just something happened for those, you know, for those few minutes. Um, and it's funny because there's also a John Reagan connection for me because John Reagan was connected to the guys in the Aerosmith camp. And when my name got thrown in to the Aerosmith camp, John Reagan was the guy that said, "Yeah, that's the guy you need," because I saw him handle Peter. Um,
Really?
any guy that can deep dive with Peter can handle Joe Perry.
So what was John's connection to Aerosmith? Do you know?
Um, John Bianelli, Joe's day-to-day handler, and then Tommy, um, who's the Aerosmith studio manager, and John Reagan are best friends. And
All
so when
right.
my name got thrown into the Frampton camp, obviously they knew to call John Reagan because John Reagan was Peter
Yeah.
Frampton for 30 years. Um, and that was the backup to the recommend
Hmm.
that I gotten. Um,
What
and that's it. It's a people business.
yeah, it's what little I've
And because the question it's never is this guy good at tuning guitars? It's is this guy somebody I want on the bus?
yeah.
It's all about the hang, and it's all about, is this guy going to self implode if we get on a bus and we're in
Hmm.
Piedmont, North Dakota? Is this somebody that I'm going to want to hang out with in a bar or at a restaurant? Because the toughest part about being a crew member is finding other crew members that you want to hang out with.
Yeah.
Because I've been in some camps where just get me out of there. I've,
So,
I've I've gotten it wrong a couple of times where I just ended up in the wrong place.
yeah. Where did where after Frampton? I mean, I know Aerosmith's on the horizon there. Was there anything else in between that?
Yeah, there's a couple of things in the middle that we're not going to talk about because I just landed in the wrong place.
Okay. Um, so we talked.
But same thing is that, but also remember that COVID hit, and
Mhm.
so live music just disappeared.
Now, were
Um,
you with Aerosmith before COVID?
no,
No. Okay.
and so uh, again, just Peter paid his whole crew um, all the way through that first year of COVID. And so I stayed in Nashville as his studio manager because Peter has a beautiful, you know, 6,000 square foot, 5 room studio with an SSL and,
Mhm.
5 rooms and isolation rooms. That's his. And so I was managing that as my day gig when COVID hit. Um, but I wanted to be on the road. I was a touring tag, and I took a couple of gigs thinking I'd found a new home, and they were just not the right place for me. Um,
Mm.
and so and at the time, because Peter had retired from touring at the end of 2019, we'd done the finale tour. We all hugged each other Saturday Night Live style in San Francisco, and I thought he was done on the road. And then my friend Aiden, who's the bass tech from Def Leppard, called me and said, "Hey, Joe Perry needs a guitar tech. Are you interested?" And I couldn't say no.
So Joe Perry,
Yeah.
this gentleman right there, this guy on this record
Uh,
wants you to be his
Joe
guitar tech.
Joe fucking Perry,
One of the Toxic Twins.
one of the most fucking beautiful human beings you will ever meet.
Now I gotta say this because, you know, my favorite thing about Joe Perry was he had a line of salsa
Yeah, the hot
or hot
sauce.
sauce, something like that, in the late, like 2008, 9s, 10s, somewhere in there. And they served them at the Hard Rock Cafe, and they had this chicken and pineapple quesadilla with Joe Perry's mango salsa. To this day, my favorite food of all time. I was crushed when they took it off the menu.
There's a
Um,
box. There's one box, I believe, of Joe Perry hot sauce in the storage place in Boston, and it's worth. It's insured for like ridiculous amounts of money, and it'll never be opened. It's
yeah.
just sitting there on the shelf.
Well, if anybody out there, I don't care if it's expired or not, got Joe Perry's mango hot
Hot sauce.
sauce,
Yeah,
um, hit
ridiculous.
me up. But so that's got to be a just again, you got this Frampton thing, and it's kind of like top of the mountain, but yet then there's another mountain just
Different
as
mountain.
big.
It's not a mountain. It's I mean, just a sideways step. I mean,
Yeah.
Joe was a challenge. Joe was a whole different challenge. Same
What?
thing. And I felt like I'd gotten to be a pretty decent tech with Peter.
Yeah.
Uh, but then Joe was like that was a fast education because
Let me ask.
they
Let me
were in
ask.
Vegas.
Let me ask you this real quick. How many guitars in the touring rig on average for Frampton?
Uh, 12 to 14 electrics and then 6 to 8 acoustics. So 2 volts.
Hmm.
So 20 guitars total, maybe
And then with Joe, what are you
52.
looking at? 52?
No.
Um,
But it sounds ridiculous, but also you have to remember that with Aerosmith, there's a lot of guitars that, like the Peter Frampton guitars, they're all in the same tuning, they're all in the same key. And so you've got Phoenix, and then you've got a 335, and then you've got a couple of Les Pauls, you've got a Strat maybe for one song, you've got a guitar that's got slightly less output for Baby, and you're always playing an acoustic for Baby I Love You Way, but they're all tuned the same for the most part, unless you're doing the acoustic for Penny. But with Joe, all of that goes out the window because you've got guitars that are specific to one song that are tuned with bass strings in a completely different tuning, and then guitars that have got three of the strings missing for the first, So if you got 26 songs in the set, you've got 26 guitars. And then you have to think about, well, if one of those guitars fucks up, you can't just give him any other guitar because they're song specific. So you then have to have backups for those specific guitars. And so it ends up being around about 40, 46 guitars. And then you're going to grab 5 or 6 others because he may just want to play something different one night. And so by the time we got to doing the finale tour, I was cat. We had 5 vaults of 12 guitars. That was almost 60 guitars backstage. On when I did the Vampires tour with him, we took 26 because he wasn't playing any of those weird tunings, but he still
mhm.
wanted the BC Rich, and he wanted the upside down Strat, and he wanted the clear body, and all the guitars that he's known for. He wanted the Billy guitar, um, and so you manage that, but it was great to touch all those guitars.
Hmm. What so what what's the biggest difference? I mean, besides, the amount of guitars, what's the biggest difference between, let's say, Frampton and Aerosmith? Just in that tech world.
So Peter, and it's funny because they both Peter and Joe have this reckless abandon and this beautiful chaotic poeticness to their playing. They're very different players, but Peter likes the same. So we would use the same sound for the same section of the song. What he would play would be different. Some nights he would be on, and some nights he would be off. But that's the beauty of live music. Peter never plays the same thing twice, and neither does Joe. So they have a lot in common. Um, Peter's a lot more in control of his tonal um, balance. It's the same rig. Peter's running three heads, three Marshall cabinets, wet center, dry, left and right wet, two Leslies and a little combo. And his sounds are song specific. And then within a song, you've got six sounds for that song. There's a verse section or there's an intro section. And then the verse section is always on the same sound. And when you get to the solo section, you always hit this button. So it was very, very regimented in terms of the tones that we would use and how the rig was going to be used. Joe is just fucking chaos. And I mean that with the biggest amount of respect because I love that because he literally goes out and it's different every night. Give him a bunch of tones. And when I built Joe's rig for the Vampires, he would change stuff on the fly every night. Hey, I found this in a used guitar store today. Put that on my pedal board. Well, do we know it works? No. But let's, and we'd fly by the seat of our pants. Peter would never do that. Peter's rig was, if you looked in the back of it, Mark Snyder, who built his rig, I mean, it was meticulous. It was like going to a dentist. The thing worked every night. I would turn it on, it would come up, all the lights would flash, cable it up, and it would just be quiet and it would just be beautiful. Joe's rig, well, just, every night was a battle to get this thing together because we would want something different. By the time we got to Aerosmith for the big Peace Out tour, we had to him and I had sat down and we devised a switching system that had never been done before. It's funny, it's great because I brought this switching system into Brad when I first started working for Night Ranger. But Joe likes to turn stuff on and then he'll walk away. And so I've got to be able to turn stuff off because he likes chaotic things for solos, octaves and flanges and fuzzes on top of fuzzes on top of tape delays. So he would hit things and then he would just go off and wander to the front of the stage. And so the big thing with Joe was not so much turning stuff on, it was being able to turn it off. And so I built him a pedal board system where there was 4 controllers. And there's actually a video online that you can look at where I was talking about that system when I built it for RJM Music. But, Joe and Peter actually play a lot alike in that they make these musical statements on the fly. Brad's a whole different player in a whole different
What?
different different category. And but that yeah. So the question is like, what's it? What are Peter and Joe? They have a lot in common, which was great because I was used to that. I was
Mhm.
used to those musical statements being improvised. It's really hard, when you're playing songs that everybody knows, and then Joe would just improvise in the middle of them, and sometimes it lands, and sometimes it doesn't. And Joe will take a left turn, and then everybody else is like just hanging out. But that's what makes them what they are. They're
Yeah.
dangerous. And they're
When
not just dangerous because they do drugs, they're musically dangerous because they take chances.
yeah.
Um, and I love that. That's one of the reasons they were one of my favorite bands. If you listen to them on vinyl, you can hear them doing that.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
it's exciting to be around. It's nerve-wracking to be around when you're his tech because shit goes wrong. And the number of times I've had, we were in Germany on the Vampires tour and an amp blew up in the middle of the show, and I'm trying to change it out, and it's hitting 3,000 decibels. It hit me in the face, and there's a picture of me trying to dial the amp, and you can see in my face that I'm just getting destroyed. Um, but gosh, what a privilege,
Yeah.
you
Did
know.
when you started working for Aerosmith, was that before the Peace Out tour or was
No,
that
yeah, it was before I started with doing that. I started doing the Vegas thing when
okay?
they were on the residency in Vegas. Did
Where
that.
were you when you heard, hey, we're doing this next tour is going to be our last one? Do you remember when you first heard that news?
Yeah, well, we knew in Vegas because they were planning. When I joined the band, they were already planning Peace Out.
Okay.
Um, because they had a lot of the things that they were going to incorporate into the arena tour. They were kind of working those out in the showroom in Vegas.
Yeah.
So we knew it was coming. Um, and we started Peace Out in 23. And we did 3 shows. We had
Did
70 we had 72 shows booked.
mm,
We did 2 weeks rehearsals. Uh, we did 3 shows. We did the first show was in Pittsburgh, then we did Philadelphia, um, and then we did Newark, um, and then we were in Toronto when we got the call to because we were going to be show 4. We had a day off in Toronto. We flew in, had a day off, and then we just got the call going. Now we're going to take a 6-week break. Stephen hurt himself, and then it just became the
yeah.
year off. And then we were ready and waiting to go back out in 2024. And then I went to NAMM at the start of this year. Um, I closed out last year with Joe. I was on salary with Aerosmith until the end of the year. I went to Boston, cataloged his guitar collection, cataloged his amp collection, and then that was it. And then event was planning on going back to Aerosmith in September for Peace Out when it resumed this year. And so I had nothing to do for 2024, and I went to NAMM in Los Angeles to try and make some connections for this year. And I'm sitting at the bar having fish tacos, and I get a call from a gentleman called Ed Repepi.
Ed Repepi.
Ed Repepi.
What you